Welcome back to the Everything Education podcast. If you're a regular listener, you might think you know what to expect, but today's episode is bringing you something different. The first portrait in the, well, not very long history of the podcast. I am joined in my virtual studio by an absolute and unparalleled legend in the world of ELT and summer schools. He doesn't know, but he's this year's Christmas special guest. But I hadn't told him this beforehand as I didn't want him to hang any baubles in his beard, but then look at his hat. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Thom Jones, not the singer, joining from his attic in York.
I am actually going to remove the hat now because I think we've done the celebration. I used to wear the hat when I worked outside in a shed and the children could see that I had the hat on. So I was working so it wouldn't disturb me while I was wearing the hat. Obviously, in the era of the kind of video conference thing, it's not as good as a technique because you then have to explain to the people you're working with why you're dressed as a gnome. So, thank you. Thank you for that very kind introduction. I'm not entirely sure I can back up any of it, but...
Well, I thought I'd ask you anyway to back it up. I was going to ask you to introduce yourself, not because I don't know you, but because I'm really, really curious to hear how you introduce yourself, and I will explain that later. But would you mind introducing yourself, Thom?
I wouldn't.
For those who for some reason don't know you.
I don't know what, yeah. No, I basically, I think any notoriety I have within an industry is basically because I've been in it for a very long time and because I have a really stupid name and I look like a pirate. So people at conferences always go, I know him because he's the guy with the stupid name who looks like a pirate. Nobody is pointing at me at conferences and going, gosh, he's a steady pair of hands and professionally incredibly skilled and a deft worker, which is maybe a sad thing. So I suppose professionally, I do three things. And I run in the summer, I run a course for international students in Cambridge for summer boarding courses, which I've done forever. And then the rest of the year, I do trainings, which are trainings for teachers, but also training for kind of business people. And I present at conferences, which used to be about education and increasingly are about anything, which is slightly embarrassing. As a result, all of the parents at the drop-off with my kids all think that I'm a spy.
You've lived in a fair few countries, so...
Sorry, yes, also. So, I left school and I wanted to be... I always wanted to be a teacher. From when I was very young, I had a very boring understanding of what the possibilities of life were, and I wanted to be a teacher. And I loved school. I really enjoyed school, despite being rubbish at it in terms of academic ability. But I really enjoyed it, and I liked the kind of learning, and I liked the process, and I liked the place, I think. And then I wanted to be a teacher, but in the UK then, you couldn't be a teacher with, I have epilepsy. So I was diagnosed when I was 17, and I suddenly then discovered that I couldn't become a teacher in the UK with epilepsy. Because, if you're in charge of 35 people and you fall unconscious, it's not great. The world of EFL beckoned because my lovely friend, Matt Kelly, who did loads of amazing things. He's a great person to talk to. And he now runs a brewery, which is... and he went off and did EFL and loved it and said, oh, you should do this. And I thought, yeah, great. So I did. And I loved it. And it was brilliant. And so every year I went to a different country. And in the summer, I'd come home and do summer schools. And I was kind of, having been totally useless at school, I was surprised to be quite good at work. In a strange way, do you know what I mean? Like, it was a sort of my first experience.
Happens to some people.
Well, it's a long gone era. But...
one thing you tend to point out whenever you write about your life is that you were rubbish at maths, in particular. Yes,
I failed maths GCSE 3 times, possibly 4. I'm not really good at maths, and I always feel I've got sort of the mathematical age of about 7 in terms of knowing stuff and counting. So, anybody who's ever worked with me will tell you this. I always, for example, on trips, will always get the students to count themselves. So I'll send 2 students around the group to count the group. And as long as their number And people always say, isn't that great? You're empowering the students and you're, and I'm not. I just can't count. So slightly embarrassed.
There's another thing that you tend to point out, again, when you write about your life. And do you know what that is?
No.
His mother thinks he's great.
Oh, it's true. My mother is unerringly supportive. And I've always said if I ended up in prison, my mother would be like sat around with her mates having coffee and going, well, do you know, he's stabbed more people than anybody else this week. Do you know what I mean? My mother is unfailingly proud of everything that I do. But also still gets my ear and twists it if I'm cheeky, which I think is a bit mean because I'm 52, but glad to have her.
So, running the risk of sounding like a very expensive therapist, I am going to ask you about your childhood, your relationship with your mum. I'm not saying it's clear, but we can get an idea.
No, it's lovely. I think I'm very lucky. I grew up. My mother is an academic, was the first in her family to go to university. She's originally from North Wales, Welsh speaking, and we grew up in Yorkshire. And my father is also an academic, a sociologist from Hull. My other father, confusingly, because there's quite a lot of parents, so my biological parents split when I was 2. But they all kind of, so I grew up with my mother and my father, who are both sociologists, both first in their family to go to university, both kind of evangelical, I think, about the powers of education, and they loved education. And then my biological father and my stepmother, who I ended up with sort of 4 parents, which is a really nice blend. I get along with all of my parents, and my parents get along with each other, which is amazing. So as a kid, I just had quite a large family. And it was a very different, disparate family because I grew up in York and then we moved to Bristol. And I think my mother, I found school very hard academically because I didn't have, I think now I'd probably be diagnosed with something, I imagine. But at the time, I was tested for dyslexia and various things, and I didn't have any of those things. I just wasn't very interested. I just wanted to be outside on my bike. I wasn't, excitingly naughty or rebellious. I was perfectly, well behaved, and I was clearly kind of interested. And if the class was interesting and I was interested, I would do stuff, but I couldn't really write coherently. My writing is abysmal, and I just wanted to be outside on my bike really most of the time. So I kind of found school a bit of a dead letter, but I enjoyed it. And I enjoyed, theatre, and I had 3 really sort of transformatively wonderful teachers who I totally loved, and they were brilliant at making me kind of, because obviously when you fail everything at school, you do tend to feel like you're stupid, and they were really good at saying, you're not stupid, you're just not very academic, which, who's laughing now? Yeah, headmaster.
You said 3 teachers, which is quite rare for someone to sort of these clearly remember who had an important influence on their lives. So do you want to tell me more about them?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no. So I had a really lovely teacher called Mrs. Roberts, who was my religious education teacher from when I was about 14, and she was brilliant, and she was just funny and really interested in us and really strict. And she wasn't a fun teacher. She was just really clever and really good at talking to all of us as if we were clever. Do you know what I mean? Which made a massive difference, I think. Rather, she didn't do that thing which teachers often do where they're frustrated and angry and sarcastic. She'd always talk to us as if we were clever about things that we didn't understand, and we desperately try and pretend that we did because she was great. You know what I mean? And we just thought she was brilliant, And she was really great. She was with me until A-level. So I did A-level religious education, which was very rare. There was only 2 of us in the class, me and my friend Justin. And actually, me and my friend Justin and his hedgehog, because he was a gamekeeper's son, so he had a hedgehog that was in his bag most of the time. And God, obviously, if you believe in God, because obviously that was the whole point of the class was, are there 2 of us in the class and a hedgehog, or are there 3? Because is there a God in the class or in the world? And so that was quite fun.
What made you stick with religious studies?
I think I always really loved stories, and I always really loved books, and I always loved reading. And my biological father had an antiquarian bookshop. So when I was on holiday with him, childcare was just, put me in the bookshop, so I'd just read. And but I didn't learn to read and write until I was about 9, which was very late. And I think with RE, I had a great teacher which sparked it. And I think it just felt like the kind of basis of all of the stories was religion on some level. Do you know what I mean? And I loved all the kind of iconography, and I loved all of the trappings of religion and the ceremony of it. And I grew up in a very unreligious household, not an unspiritual household, but quite kind of anti-religion. My parents were sort of aggressively secular, very political and very principled and very good in a lot of really important ways, I think. But they weren't religious, and they were quite anti-religious and quite suspicious of religion. So I think I quite liked it. It's kind of quiet rebellion. I wasn't religious myself. Like, I always believed in God, but I didn't believe in religion, really. It felt like, like football. Do you know what I mean? There's a lot of different teams, but it doesn't really matter what jersey you wear, does it? It's the game. Like, are you a good person? Are you nice to people? Well, I think I've always liked the idea of God, not because I think that, there's some sort of bloke sat on a cloud wondering whether I eat fish on a Friday, or whether I, observe the Sabbath on a Saturday, or, do you know what I mean? I think I like the idea that there's a God, because I'd like there to be one. Do you know what I mean? I'd like it to mean something, life, So it's more of a kind of hope rather than a sort of detailed theological belief. Do you know what I mean?
So teacher number 2?
Teacher number 2 was Mark Evans, who was fab, and was also, Welsh family, obviously the Evans thing. His family was distantly Jewish. My family was distantly Jewish, and he was just very charismatic and really, really funny, and really, really interested in his books and in he was an English teacher, and he loved the language, and he loved playing with the language, and he loved having a laugh, and he just loved, like, he was a singer, and he was just great, and you kind of wanted to be around him, really, and you wanted to sort of tug his sleeve and say, be my friend, be my friend. And he was with me kind of all through school, and he was sort of very formative, I think. And I later uncovered sort of terrible things about him as a teacher, well, as a person, maybe, I don't know, in his private life, sort of terrible gossip and scandal, which I was horrified by, but not until I was about 40, by which time, the formative stuff had been done. And also, like, he was a teacher for me, he wasn't my dad. And so as a teacher, he was great for me. And he was very clear about saying, if you shut up and do work, you can do good things. And you're like, oh, right, gosh.
Right, so teacher number 3.
Teacher number 3 was definitely Mrs. Adams, who actually is probably a tie between Mrs. Adams and Mr. Bruce, because they were both history teachers of mine, and they were both extremely human and extremely willing to talk with anybody about anything. And if you kind of showed an interest in history, which I did, I loved history, they immediately kind of responded to that, and were just lovely people. And they were very good, again, I think, at that thing where, in a system where the exams meant, because I failed exams all the time, and I always just felt really stupid, and it was easy to feel like an idiot, because the system kind of makes you that. And also I proved it a lot. And they were really good at saying, actually, you're not an idiot, and don't allow yourself to think of yourself as an idiot, which was really important, because my parents did that. My parents were incredibly loving and incredibly supportive. But having, you kind of expect your parents to, don't you? If you're lucky enough to have nice parents, then of course they're going to say nice things about me. It doesn't mean anything. But somebody outside of that who says, actually, you're really worth listening to, or worth, reading work off, was really important, I think.
So do you think having these very strong teachers in your life has influenced your choice to become a teacher?
Yes, yeah, definitely. And I think I always want to be a teacher, because I always want to be a teacher or a police officer, weirdly enough. And I feel that the roles are quite similar. And I think the teaching stuff was because once I started going into the classroom and meeting young people and I kind of initially was terrible at it and did it all the wrong way and did it all badly. And, and then I did my CELTA, which is only like a 4-week course, isn't it? But I did that and realised what a terrible teacher I was and made loads of effort to try and not be such a terrible teacher. And I also had that kind of native speaker thing, which, 30 years ago, you would be kind of flown to a strange country and given an apartment and paid often significantly more than much more qualified and experienced colleagues who were significantly better teachers than I was, and who very generously taught me all the things that I didn't know about my mother tongue, because then in the UK, there wasn't a great deal of grammar taught in terms of English language, or if it was, it certainly passed me by. And so, when I started teaching English, I realised that I didn't know anything about the structure of the language or really anything useful to teach anybody. So I was really lucky that I had some great materials, actually, some really lovely. I used to use a book by a woman called Gina Evans, who I ended up working for, which was brilliant. So that was really lovely. She founded Express Publishing, which is an amazing story in itself. And she wrote these books, which were really good in terms of me kind of realising what I had to teach. And and then I later met her, which was amazing, and worked for her. So it's quite fun. Nice circle.
You are often quite, well, not self-critical, but vocal about native speakerism, and you're reflective about how that being a native speaker has helped your career early on. When did you realise that it's probably an issue, not you getting on in life, but native speakerism
I got a job in Indonesia when I was about 25, 26 as a principal of a school, and realised quite quickly that I'd got the job largely because I was white and because I was a man and because I was quite tall, and not in any way any kind of professional capacity that I brought to it, really. And my boss was an ethnic Chinese guy who was, at the time in Indonesia, that was quite a difficult thing to be, in terms of kind of facing the public and selling things, and not a popular thing to be. And he very much had me to kind of sit at the front of the school in an office with a big window and be seen from outside as like a flesh flag of a white person, I'm just a native speaker and all these things. And I think, then it's very easy, isn't it, to believe that one succeeds because one is wondrous and brilliant and great. And actually you kind of think, yeah, come on, actually, it's not about any of those things, is it? And I always feel like I'm not doing myself down. Do you know what I mean? Like I feel like I've done all right at work and I've always tried my best and things. But I feel like when I stand up in front of a room at a conference, people expect to listen and expect that I'll probably say something worth listening to, or that they should listen. Because of the patriarchy, because of the native speaker bias that we live under. And it's really interesting because I do French language stuff and English language stuff. And in English language stuff, people always want to know that I'm British or that I'm, a native speaker, and that's really important. And in a French language context, nobody cares. So when I train a group of French teachers, nobody ever asks me where I'm from. Nobody ever asks me, how I can prove that I'm allowed to teach them about French, because we do it together, and, and obviously so I will occasionally make, grammar mistakes or whatever. And we all do, because we're all teachers, and that's, and I do it in my first language as well. That's part of speaking, isn't it? Is that one makes errors. And I feel it's fascinating that as a native speaker and as a bloke and as a white person, you get that all kind of handed to you on a platter, where people go, oh, wonderful, yes, please come and talk to us about things. Really?
Do you feel that it's all starting to change, at least?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. And I think, it's also that really interesting thing about aging, in that, when I was younger, I would always be enraged about the kind of white middle-class British men, on podiums at conferences everywhere. And I'm that. Oh, hang on. Sorry, all that stuff I said before about not listening to white middle-class men on podiums. No, I don't mean that now. It's all right if it's me. Do you know what I mean? So it's a weird kind of, because it's interesting that at conferences I will often say, next year can one of you come up and do this talk? And next year come and talk here, and I'll mentor people for that very purpose. And yet, like, people will ask you to come back the following year, and you're like, no, my point is that you should be talking. Do you know what I mean? That I'll often go to conferences in countries where I'm saying to local people, look, you should be standing up and talking because you're the expert. Like, I arrived this morning and you're now saying to me, how do we teach? You're like, I don't know. I don't speak your language. I know nothing about your culture. I know nothing about your context. What can I tell you? Not much. And I'll say that in a conference. And then people will go, please come back next year. And you're like, no, I want you to, you know? So.
Yeah, but it is about the balance, and it is about drawing attention to all the white middle class men on the stage. Yeah. And I think, I suppose, you know, the only saving grace of being the white middle-aged man on the stage is that I'm conscious that I'm a white middle-aged man on the stage, and I try to share the stage as much as I can. And I think that's important. So I will often, for example, if I'm doing a closing plenary at an event, I'll often spend the time at the event going around and watching other speakers and chatting to people in the coffee breaks, and then ask them. So I'll stand up and I'll do the closing plenary, and then I'll hand the mic over to somebody who qualified yesterday, or somebody who qualified 50 years ago, or somebody who, you know, and share that experience around the room. Because actually, I feel like those are the people that they should be listening to. And if I facilitate that, that's all right. I feel like that's fair. I mean, absolutely. You've got quite a few different hats, from teacher to trainer, motivator, influencer, I'd say.
Influencer?
I don't know. Are you an influencer?
I'm just trying a different hat on. I'd love to be able to rock a beret. I really would, but I live in Yorkshire, so you can't go outside with a beret on because I'd be killed. I'm not an influencer by any means at all, apart from possibly encouraging people to ride a bicycle and drink tea, because most of my social media posts appear to be about drinking tea. I don't know, like, I feel with LinkedIn, I used to be, you know, do the kind of, I think I was kind of probably one of the first people to start laughing at LinkedIn on LinkedIn. Do you know what I mean? And kind of posting very obvious brags and saying, look, I'm bragging. I'm totally bragging. And using it like that, which people either really like and think is very funny, or hate. And in a good way like that, as a freelancer, that's quite nice, because it means people interact with it and then book me, and they kind of know what I'm like, you know? Whereas people who don't like it and don't interact with me and don't book me, I don't have to work with. So that's quite nice.
So did the travel brag series come out of those brags on LinkedIn?
Yes, yeah, exactly. And I kind of do, on social media I always talk about obnoxious travel brags, you know, because like I do travel about all the time, and that's my job. And it is kind of obnoxious going, hello, I'm in Paris. But it's also fab, and I love it, and I think it's great. So I do kind of consciously mock it, but I also do it. Do you know what I mean? And I think what's very interesting is I'll always put random numbers, you know, obnoxious travel brag number, whatever. And people will always go, yeah, what do those numbers mean? And you're like, they don't matter. You know what I mean? And that always makes me, I do a thing on social media, which I really enjoy, where on my mother's birthday or Mother's Day, I always post these things about my mum, which are patently ridiculous, about how she played bass on Jeff Beck's Hi-Ho Silver Lining as a session musician in the 60s, or went to space because of an admin error on her year out, or do you know what I mean? Just totally ridiculous stuff. And what always fascinates me is the amount of people who interact with it as if it's true. You know, and they always kind of go, why are you writing a book about your mother? I didn't know she was born French. And you're like, no, what? You know, and it's really interesting to me that people will take that at face value. And I feel like increasingly as a species, we are kind of skimming above a lot of communication and floating on the top of, you know, so that glance that goes, oh, Tom's mum went to space for the USSR. You know, people just go, all right, great. You're like, no, obviously that didn't happen, you know? So that I find really fascinating.
Just going back to influencing and motivating, I mean, you do, I'm not looking for the tag or the title, but you do motivate a lot of people. I mean, we both know someone who's at least used to have a post-it note saying, what would Thom Jones do on her desk?
I think, but largely so she wouldn't do that. But no, I mean, I think, I don't know. I've got a lot of energy, you know, I've got a lot of, like, I love what I do, and I've got a lot of energy, and I I when I train people, when I work with groups, any groups, but anything really, the intention, if I'm training business people in sales, if I'm training people on presenting, if I'm training students on use of language, if I'm training anything, my intention is that the people will leave the room feeling clever and feeling confident, because not as a trick, but because it's important. Do you know what I mean? And actually because everybody's brilliant. You know what I mean? And I always feel like, you know, I suppose neurologically, the roll of dice or whatever that I ended up with just means that I'm effervescently cheerful, and that's probably quite wearing for some people. Do you know what I mean? But I do wake up every morning and think, oh, hey, and I think in a weird way, like because of having epilepsy, I feel like every day when I wake up and I'm not dead is brilliant. You know, because I think, hey, still alive, and I genuinely feel like, you know, you wake up alive, the day can only get better, can't it? Do you know what I mean? You've already started on a brilliant high. You know, where's it going to go from this? And I think, take great pleasure in small things. So, yeah, I love having a cup of tea, and I love having a biscuit, and I love finding, you know, a really lovely old leather satchel in a junk shop, or I love trying a silly hat on. And I think it's about, you know, like I always take my work very seriously, but I never take myself seriously, you know? And that, you know, some people think that's lovely and refreshing and wonderful, and some people feel worn down by the effervescent energy of my cheerfulness. And you think, fair enough, you know? Either way, isn't it? You know? I worked with somebody this summer actually who, after a couple of weeks, she was a psychology student, and she said, yeah, when I first met you, I thought you were manic depressive. And I've realised now that you're just manic. I thought it was really funny. So,
do you tend to have an sort of an urge to educate people as well? Do you tell people if they don't do the right thing?
Yeah, I feel like I will. My partner will always say how often it is being out with me in public, because, you know, if people are fighting in the street or if they drop litter, I'll always shout at them and make them pick it up, or make them stop fighting and separate them. And she's always like, they're not your students, you know, they're going to turn around and stab you. And obviously that's sort of true on one level, you know what I mean? But I feel like kind of in modern life, a lot of people observe modern life and kind of increasingly kind of through the lens, you know, and we don't participate, you know, whereas I feel like I'm a participator. So if I see people doing something, I will often jump in, and they often don't want me to, you know what I mean? But I'll often go, oh, hang on, look. And I feel like at university, my friends always used to laugh about my Superman gene, that I would kind of leap in wherever there was injustice and then have no superpowers and would just get beaten up. Do you know what I mean? But I've always thought, well, you know, if that's the price of it, I'd rather get punched. Like, I don't like being punched, but I'd rather get punched while trying to stop somebody do something than just watch them do it. Do you know what I mean?
But have you ever been punched?
Yeah. Not enough, if you ask some people. But no, but I think like there's always a risk, isn't there, that you know, 9 times out of 10 when you jump in and go, "Oi, you stop that," and you know, people will go, "Yeah, all right," because they kind of want somebody to stop a horrible situation, even if they're doing it. Do you know what I mean? But there is that 10th time where people will take it out on you, and that, you know, that does happen sometimes. And I'm quite big, so I can be punched a bit, and it's sort of all right. And I think people, yeah, I've been very lucky. You know, I've not ever had anything really horrific happen. And again, I think, you know, I'm able to step in or jump in situations in life because I am physically relatively imposing, and you know, now increasingly I'm the age of people's dads. So when somebody goes, stop doing that, people tend to go, oh yeah, right, fair enough, because you know, they sort of think, well, you're like my dad, you know, and they're less likely, I suppose, as I get older to punch me because I'm an old person, you know. White beard, nobody's going to punch Santa.
Especially with the right hat on.
Exactly, that's key. But I don't want you to feel that I spend my life walking around, you know, solving injustice and being punched. I probably quite a lot of people would like to punch me, you know, just for talking at conferences.
What's your relationship with your body? I mean, And what I mean is, you're a thinker. You're a sort of a spiritual person, not too spiritual, but in the good sense. I think you do think about stuff.
Yeah.
Do you take care of your body as well?
Yeah, I think in a weird way, like I think part of the energy thing in terms of being somebody who's quite up and quite energetic is that I always feel that need to run about a bit, you know, and like my family always say I'm like a Jack Russell, you know, that I need to have a run, and that we'll get to a certain point on a weekend where they're like, go and do something, you know, and my partner will often invent tasks that need to be done where I have to go to 3 different points in the city on my bicycle because she wants a bit of a break and she wants me to leave her alone, but she also wants me to run some of that energy off, you know. So I think in terms of relationship with the body, I don't like going to a gym. Like I will go to a gym if that's the only option, but I'll only do like a rowing machine and a punch bag. I don't really like anything else. But I will every day. I'll cycle. I'm part of a historical European martial arts club. So I really enjoy fencing and having a ruck, you know, that kind of actually sort of having a bit of a play fight, you know, and I really enjoy that with my kids and I really enjoy that with my friends. And I've always quite enjoyed that sort of stuff, you know, not the violent side of it, but that physical exertion and that sort of, you know, I like archery and I like that kind of mind, you know, and that in a set archery, I think is really spiritual. It's really hand-eye coordination and I really enjoy that. And I think physicality and the body, like I love dancing and I love cycling. And I always feel like if I had not had epilepsy, I'd probably be massive. Do you know what I mean? Because I love food and I love eating. And, you know, I'd probably drink alcohol. I'd probably drink coffee. I'd probably drive a car. So I'd probably be about 3 times the size. So in a weird way, as a middle-aged person, like epilepsy is quite a blessing because I'm relatively fit, relatively healthy, and my clothes still fit me. Do you know what I mean? And what I do have physically, which is really interesting, that I've noticed over the last 20 years, which is unerring, and people always laugh and think it's a joke, but it's true, is I'll often see people who I haven't seen for a bit and they'll go, oh, you've lost weight. And I'm like, and I'm always about the same size. So what I've realised is I've got a very fat personality. Do you know what I mean? It would suit me to be quite fat and quite round and quite jolly because I'm jolly and I'm like Santa, you know, like so people in their mind's eye think of me as quite sort of, you know, round and avuncular and like an affable uncle. And so when they see me, they're often like, oh gosh, you've lost weight. You're like, no, I'm just not actually a fat person. And like, I'm not a skinny person either, but it's really interesting because it's a consistent thing that happens to me so often that can only be the reason, you know, is that I've got a very jolly personality. So people it would suit me to be quite fat. So I'm hoping as I get older, I'll get really fat because I could totally carry it off.
You do like some physical challenges, don't you? Cycling across very long distances, rowing.
Yeah. But again, that's about not driving. Do you know what I mean? Like if I drove, I grew up in the countryside and I grew up where, you know, if you want to get anywhere, you have to ride a bike, you know? And as a teenager, I lived in Bristol and there's massive hills and I rode a BMX. So you had to just, you know, hack up hills or get off and push. And my parents were into cycling holidays. So we'd quite often get on bikes and cycle quite far away. And that was all right and possible. And I'm really grateful to my parents because I think they both showed me the magic of, you know, A, you can walk anywhere, it'll just take you longer. B, you can definitely ride a bike anywhere and it will take you longer. And C, you can sleep anywhere, which is magic because it's such an amazing freedom to just be able to go like, I'll kip under that bush and I'll sleep under the hedge, you know, because you can. And like, it's not always comfortable or warm, but you can, and it's all right.
And you do make a point of sleeping anywhere. Is it genuinely not bothersome to sleep at an airport? Or in the bushes?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because so often I'll post on social media about sleeping at an airport. Because if I kind of leave late from my house and get the last train, I can get to the airport, you know, in the middle of the night and lie down for a couple of hours and have a bit of sleep, and then just stand up and get on the plane. and it's lovely, and it's laziness. It's not toughness or grit.
Hang on a second, just please don't tell me it's not true that you also just make it up and take a picture at the airport and then go back
Bear
to
Grylls.
the hotel.
No, it is true. Like I will literally just kind of lie down on, with the head on my bag with a coat over me and go to sleep. And I've always done that because it just, and I feel like if I'm going to get a hotel for like 2 hours and check into the hotel and then get my stuff out and then check out of the hotel and get out of it, I'm only going to sleep for a couple of hours anyway. So you might as well just kip on the floor. And also I can sleep anywhere. So if I sleep on the floor for a couple of hours, I'm fine, So I've always done that. And I think with the cycling or with the walking, sometimes you don't get where you need to be by the time you want to have a sleep. So, that liberty to say, well, this is a really lovely spot. There's a bit of a stream. I've got a great view. I'll just go to sleep here and then I'll wake up and have an amazing breakfast here. And it's incredible. I love that. I really enjoy that. And not, again, like it's not toughness or grittiness. It's just laziness of thinking, I'll just sleep here. It's fine.
Do you ever get into trouble with farmers when you're wild camping?
Yeah. I occasionally, like I'll do sensible things, like I won't sleep in a field with livestock, or I won't sleep anywhere that will disturb anything, because that's, and you leave no trace and all that stuff. But occasionally I've had like a farmer turn up and go, you'll have to leave. And you're like, well, I'm obviously not going to stay here, am I? Because it's like, the corner of a field. Quite obviously, I'm not intending to build a house here. And I think largely when you have a bit of a chat, they're actually quite, they very rarely, they've never called the police or done anything like that. They'll sometimes say, in the morning, for example, like late at night, I've never had anybody come and find me late at night because I don't, run about with a torch or sit there shining a light or build a fire or anything. I'm always very discreet. So I don't really have any problems at night. In the morning, sometimes somebody will see you and they'll come and say, you have to leave. And you're like, well, clearly that's what I'm doing. Like, I'm not going to, live here for the next 17 years as a hermit. And once they know that you're leaving and you have a nice conversation, 9 times out of 10, they're perfectly nice about it. And they then reminisce about camping trips of their youth, or ask you questions about your kit, which I always think is really sweet.
How has fatherhood changed you in your ways of
It's
life?
funny, isn't it? Like before I was a parent, I never really, like I kind of, career-wise, I'd sort of gone to the dizzy heights of management and, got to the point where I sat in meetings and looked at pie charts and had to pretend to care and talk about CapEx and stuff. And I was totally uninterested, really. And I think parenthood meant I was even less able to pretend that I cared about any of that stuff. Do you know what I mean? And and when my son was born, I was 42 as well. So he was quite old when my son was born. And I'd always wanted children, but it didn't happen for a lot of reasons. And I ended up having kids quite late. And I initially went through this terrible kind of terror of thinking, I've got to make as much money as possible so my children can be financially secure. And luckily, my dad, who's a very dour sociologist from Hull, was just like, listen, there is no financial security. That's total fantasy. So don't try and do that. Just, be around. And I was like, and in a weird way, like I travel maybe, 8-10 days in a month, but the rest of the month I'm at home, and I get to take my kids to school and I get to go and pick them up from school. And that's brilliant. And most of the time, like, I'll be honest, most of the time I can collect them from school and just go and have an ice cream or go and sit in the park or do their maths homework with them and have a nice time, because my job's not the kind of hectic, sometimes I have to work extra in the evening to make that time up, but often I don't, because I've worked very hard to not have that kind of job. Like people always say, you always seem very happy and relaxed. I'm like, of course I am. My job doesn't matter. And people are like, no, it's really important. It's education. And I'm like, well, yeah, of course, that bit matters. I understand that. But it's not life and death, And I love that fact.
How long have you had the kind of job that you wanted to have?
I went freelance about 12 years ago. And I've always had a job that I like, to be honest. Like, I've always been very surprised and pathetically grateful that anybody would hire me to do anything, really. It was always a big shock. But freelance thing, I basically was in one job with EC, which was lovely. And I had taken it because I was going to move to Istanbul because my partner's Turkish. And then for variety of reasons, decided that we would live in the UK. So I no longer needed to move to Istanbul. So I kind of was like, listen, actually, I don't really want that Istanbul job anymore. But I've got a friend who could do it much better than me, Bahar, if you're there, Bahar. And I was like, this person would be much better at this job than I am anyway. You know what I mean? But, you know, and they were like, and they interviewed her and they're like, God, you're right, yeah. And she's brilliant. And they were there, they then sort of said, oh, can you carry on doing this bit? And can you maybe do this bit? And I was like, yeah. And then there was various people who kind of saw me moving career-wise. Were like, oh, can you come and do this for us? Could you do a bit of this for us? And I was like, yeah, I could. You know, and it just sort of happened organically. And I think what's really lovely as a freelancer is that people will say, you know, that's the hard thing, isn't it? When people say, what do you do? You know, well, anything really. So, you know, I've made adverts for Norwegian tourism, or I've done, you know, days dressed as a Viking, or do you know what I mean? Like anything. You think that's the nice part of being a freelancer.
I did want to ask you about the Norwegian gig, as well as dressing up as a Roman / Viking.
So basically, I slightly embarrassing. I was at a birthday party years ago for a Spanish friend in Oslo, and I got into an argument with somebody at the party about trolls, because they were all mouthing off about trolls in the mountains, and I was like, "Hang on, you get trolls in forests as well?" And they're like, "No, there are no trolls in forests," and we have this, you know, backwards and forwards on, you know, trolls and the nature of trolls. They were, you know, Scandinavian and assumed that they knew better as a result. And I've just read loads of books with trolls in, so, you know, I was like, hang on, look. And it was good. It was quite funny. We enjoyed it. And then she rang me up about 3 years later, and she was like, Tom, do you have any Norwegian DNA? And I was like, yeah, I do, because I've just done a DNA test. She said, oh, great, then can you ski? And I'm sorry for Norwegian people, by the way, but this is how you speak. And she said, can you ski? And I said, no, not at all. I've never skied. And she went, oh, great, okay. And then, yeah, I ended up going out there and making a series of films for the thing about skiing, in which I fell over a lot. Often accompanied with little speech bubbles going, ah, as I clapped.
How about the Roman and Viking dressing up?
So, I've always liked dressing up. And I've always liked costumes, and I've always done kind of reenactment and that sort of stuff. And I am lucky enough to have a lovely friend called Neil, who does the original Viking walk in York, where he takes tourists around and tells them about the history of York dressed as a Viking. And he's gorgeous, and he's got lovely long hair, which I remember having years ago. And he's very beautiful. And as a result, he sometimes, if he does it at night, York is a hotbed of hen parties and stag do's. So you get lots of very drunk people, right? So when he did it at night, I used to go and sort of stand behind him with a massive shield and a huge axe and fight off all the hen parties who were trying to get to this lovely Timotei hair. So we started it like that. And then he sort of was going into schools and doing historical work with students about Romans and about Viking life. So we'd go in, and it's really interesting because obviously they'll say, can we have your DBS? And you're like, yes, here's my DBS. And then they're like, right, go into the school. And you've got like an axe over your shoulder and a big sword in your belt and a spear. And you're thinking, surely some sort of, no? All right. So that sort of thing. And I think like history's always been a massive passion. And the idea, I think, of wearing the clothes is very much educational, in the sense that you can look at as many pictures of that sort of stuff as you want, but until you've actually, you know, walked outside in the winter in those clothes, you don't really know how they fit and what you do with them, and you're not really sure what this thing's for until you've had it on your belt and tried to use it. And the same's true with kind of antique weaponry, that the kind of fencing and that sort of stuff I really enjoy, because you get an idea, don't you? And you think, oh, this is what you do with that. Because I think the film world does a great job in terms of, you know, really exciting pictures and whatever, but a lot of it you kind of feel physically is not a thing. And, or, you know, that kind of spinning round backwards and swiping at people, and you think, that's not a thing that you do. But I just kind of really enjoy all that. And I think, you know, I blame Tolkien, really. Like, I like wearing a cloak, and I like that sort of fantasy world, you know.
Is it a bit different, though, when you dress up as a Roman and when you look at World War stuff, for example?
Yeah, I think the World War stuff, like I grew up in I was born in 1973, so my grandparents, the only thing my grandparents ever talked about was the war, you know? And all of my grandparents, obviously with a lot of parents, many grandparents, all of my grandparents used to talk with real enthusiasm and real passion about the war, both as horror and comedy, and their lives all changed massively as a result of it. And I think it was such a potent kind of national myth for me growing up, that I didn't realise the war had ended until I was about 7. Do you know what I mean? Because all of my toys were war toys, and all of the films on telly were all war films, and all the comics were war comics. So uncovering the other side of that kind of national myth as a teen, and discovering, the kind of international nature of that conflict and the horror of that, I think, were really, really sort of formative things for me. And I became endlessly fascinated, not in the kind of glory and I don't believe in any of that. I think just the constant horror of it, you know what I mean? That there's never been a chapter of any conflict, but certainly World War II, there's never been a chapter of that isn't hideous. The more you look at it, the more you read. And I always feel like if I feel a bit blue or a bit low, a couple of pages on any book on the Eastern Front, and I just think, I'm fine, actually. And, like my family will always say that I'm terrible because when they want to complain about something and say, I'm unhappy about this, or I'm annoyed about this, or this thing happened at school, or this thing happened at work, I'm always like, listen, you're not drinking water out of a puddle in Stalingrad. And they're like, what kind of frame of reference is that? Neither are you, which is true. Obviously, I'm not. But I think we're often unaware, aren't we, of how lucky we are. Do you know what I mean? So I feel that historical marker is really important.
And do you think your children are starting to understand that message?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. My older child is nearly 10, and he went through that thing of loving sort of swords and guns and all this stuff, and and it's now. Because we talk about it, and he kind of, because my office, which obviously in the attic's not really a thing, but there's sort of swords, and there's axes, or there's bits and bobs, and books on stuff. And he would always sort of say, but you love all this, don't you? Like, no, I don't love all this. It's like a car crash that I can't look away from. It's so horrendous. And, the sort of tragedy of what we can do to each other as a species, And you see that today, don't you? I mean, I think that's the interesting thing, isn't it? That we talk about progress and we talk about this wonderful thing. And yet, peace is so fragile and peace is so ephemeral, that we, I think, often feel that peace is the natural state and peace is how we actually survive. And yet the peace in Europe is A, fractured and always has been, and B, is very, 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 very fragile, and that's increasingly obvious today. But also the peace in the world. I mean, I think, you can't look at the horrors, in Gaza or anywhere and not think, how can anybody talk about progress or civilization when we can let, Yemen or Sudan go unchecked? Or do you know what I mean? Any of those, you just think any death is everybody's death, and I'm always really interested when there's a conflict that sparks and social media immediately says, pick a side, pick a side, pick a side, and you have to say, these people are evil, these people are evil. And I think as a species, until we're able to say, hang on, murder as a weapon of state is abhorrent, like killing anyone is always awful in any context. So can we not do that? And again, that religion thing, isn't it? Like, you boil down any religion and the jam you get from whichever fruit you've put in always says, can you stop killing each other? Can you try to be nice to each other? Do you know what I mean? And, religion, whether that's divinely inspired or whether that's just the obvious desperate hope that we could maybe stop butchering each other at every opportunity, feels like, that's what that is, You
did make a reference to books being around you.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your relationship with books.
It's an addiction, frankly, András. I can't dignify it as anything other than a massive addiction. And I love reading, and I think when I read, it's like people who smoke. Do you know what I mean? Like, people who are really good at smoking, will spark up at every opportunity and smoke. And I feel the same with books, that I will, at any opportunity, will just, grab a book and read, and I'm not reading, Thomas Mann in the original German, or, I'm not reading anything deep and intellectual. I'll read anything. I just love reading, and I love the windows into a world, and I love that capacity to live other lives, I like my life, but the way you can just experience other things. And I think that's education, isn't it? That being able to read a book about, the Greek Civil War, or being able to read a book about, unicorns, or being able to read a book about, anything that you don't know yourself, that you haven't experienced, is beautiful. It's brilliant. Well,
And you have a habit of passing on books to people.
yeah, I feel like I'm a sort of one-person Gideon's Bible. That the Gideon's Bible that in hotels they used to put a Bible in the hotel, and I feel the same way, that I will, when I finish a book, I'll just give it to somebody, because I always think, well, on you go. Or if I'm going to go and see a friend, then I'll pick something off a shelf that I think they'll like. And it's interesting because some people are very grateful and very, very keen, and some people will then go on and read it, and some people are slightly confused and don't really know why you've done that and don't want it. And you think, fair enough, it's different people, different things, eh? But I feel all of that, the cycle of life really is that I can't love a book and not want to share it. And I feel the same about ideas. I can't think a thing or work out a way of doing things and not want to share that with people. Do you know what I mean? So that kind of comes back to the educational thing, maybe.
Once we talked about books, and you said something about many people feeling bad about not reading.
Yeah. I think it's increasingly interesting that people, if I read in public, which is increasingly a radical act, but if I'm on like a plane or a train, you always see these really sad people, don't you? Kind of tapping away on their laptops desperately, and you think, oh, come on. Do you know what I mean? It's not, you'd be all right. You could just close it, be all right. And people often say to me, oh, I wish I read more, or I wish I had time to read. And you're like, well, make the time. That's how that works. That I kind of do it constantly, but I also feel that there's not an intrinsic value in reading, because I feel that people often imbue you with a kind of ascetic sort of monk-like quality because you read a book, and you're like, well, I don't think that you get access to a narrative or ideas better through a book than through watching, like 16 TikTok videos or like 4 YouTube videos. That, you're still consuming a narrative, you're still curious, you're still getting a window into another world. And I think there's maybe something in what we were saying before about being an observer and being a participant, because I think as an observer, you're watching stuff. And as a participant, you're reading stuff, because you have to really kind of put it into your head and try and work out how it looks, and that is an active act, but I feel like, it's like opera. Do you know what I mean? Like, nobody actually likes opera at all, but they like to be seen to like opera. Oh, sorry, you probably do, actually, because you're quite clever. But I feel like people often want, that some people in an opera like opera, but a lot of people want to be seen to like opera. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? And I feel a lot of, like, people want the clothing with the little crocodile on it or the little animal knit there so that people know that it's classy and was expensive. Whereas, I feel like I should wear the clothes that I like, because if I like it, then that's enough. I don't need to know whether anybody else likes it. But I often feel, I suppose that's part of life, isn't it? Is that there are people who will often view the things that I do or say or the way that I dress as performance. Do you know what I mean? And they're always like, well, you always wear these daft clothes, or you always do these daft things, you always say these things. And there's other people who get the fact that I don't do any of those things for anybody else. Do you know what I mean? Nobody else's response is of any real importance to me. Like, I like wearing a cloak because I like wearing a cloak. I love swooshing about in a cloak, And if somebody else goes, yay, cloak, that's lovely. You know what I mean? But if they go, wanker, you think, fair enough. Sorry, can you swear? Should we?
I think we can. I mean, I'll talk to the editors, but I think...
Can I apologise if anybody's hard? No, but you sort of think that's a fair response. Like, if anybody's enraged by it or happy about it, it's great. It's nothing to do with me. You know what I mean? I don't care. And I don't care, that's unfair, but that's not why I'm doing those things. That's just, I see it's interesting, I see my children, and they are both kind of armoured against the world in that they will just do what they want to do, and they'll wear what they want to wear. And I partly want to take them aside sometimes and say, listen, keep it hid. There's a price that you pay for odd. Do you know what I mean? And then you think, well, that's what you are, isn't it? But you know what I mean? And I feel like, for myself, I am quite odd. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not, I don't think I'm better than other people. I don't think I'm more intelligent or more interesting or more anything, you know what I mean? But I've not met many other people like me, which is probably to the good. But, like, I feel a lot of those sort of standard responses are not responses that I know. Genetically, that's just not in me, And I'm not very good at being bored. I'm not very good at doing a lot of stuff that, other adults seem to find really easy.
So what you do does have an element of performance, but it's for your own entertainment?
Yeah. And, I enjoy making myself laugh, and I enjoy having a laugh, and you sort of think, if any audience ever, there's always, 10% of any audience going, and 10% of an audience going, and sort of the other 80% kind of going, and you think, fair enough, on you go. No, that's all right, isn't it?
Does it ever bother you if somebody doesn't like you?
No, not at all. No, I think, I suppose because of being a teacher, really, but also growing up me, like some people don't like me, and you think, fair enough, they're probably not wrong. You know what I mean? Like I quite like tea, and if somebody wants me to drink coffee and tries to give me coffee, I'm not going to like it because I like tea, and people are the same, aren't they? Like the friends that I have or the people that I really connect with, I really enjoy and I really connect with, and that's probably not true for everybody. We all connect with different kinds of people. And I think for me, I always feel like, if somebody doesn't like me, fair enough. That's entirely okay. And they're probably right. Do you know what I mean? And there's probably facets of my personality that are annoying. I always think if I met me at a party, I'd probably like me, unless I caught me at the wrong moment, in which I'd probably think I was quite obnoxious. But, I feel like people are allowed not to like me, and you can't go through life trying to make everybody like you, because it won't, it's not going to happen. And I feel like I don't like everybody. Well, no, I think I don't want everybody to like me, but I am ready to like everybody. And I think that's really crucial. Like I do genuinely, most people that I meet and interact with are nice, and even when they're not, they're probably not because they're unhappy or because they're, do you know what I mean? And I've, that thing we were talking about like intervening when people are behaving badly and going, hang on, like I often feel that people really grab at that life ring of not being a twat and going, I have now an opportunity to not be an idiot. I'll take that, please. Do you know what I mean? And are quite grateful that you've stopped them. But you know what I mean? Conversely, some people think you are that person because you've done it. I don't know. Not everybody likes coffee.
Right. We've been talking for some time, and this is when I normally say, time for a commercial break. And then there's no commercial, because all I'd say is I ask people
luckily,
to subscribe to the podcast, and that's all. But I would like to take a bit of a commercial break with you, if that's okay. Because I've got something to talk about, which is personal, completely commercial, but I need your wisdom.
I don't think I've got any, but okay.
You definitely do. So I'm going to be running a marathon. Well, I'll try running a marathon, but more importantly, I'll be trying to do some fundraising for Prostate Cancer UK, which is a bit of a random choice, but also something that I thought would be worth for me to engage with as a charity and as an issue, because I feel most uncomfortable talking about prostates. Not something that we do. And I thought, as a man, and someone who's generally sensitive to gender issues and all these kind of things, I'll try to get your wisdom. First of all, do you think we men are generally uncomfortable just talking about prostate cancer?
Oh God, yeah.
And why?
Yeah. And I think everybody's terrified of cancer, and I think men particularly are. And I find this in myself. Like I will often ignore symptoms until I'm absolutely at death's door, and will then have that conversation with a medical professional where I'm like, and they'll say, how long has this been a pain? And you go, oh, about a year. And they're like, why are you telling me now? I think that's a characteristic thing, isn't it, in terms of male interaction with medical problems, and particularly prostate. It's very sensitive, because I think there is that thing where a lot of men never ever want to discuss their genitals with anybody ever. Do you know what I mean? Because it's so kind of anchored in a lot of men's idea of themselves, or a lot of virility and machismo are kind of, weirdly genitally anchored, which is, really, I think, probably one of the main problems in the world, to be honest. But, so men won't want to, men never want to admit weakness about anything ever. No. And any illness is seen as, that you should tough it out and you should, which is bollocks. And I feel like prostate cancer is really interesting because it's a particularly sensitive issue in that men will ignore symptoms for far, far, far too long and then die, and they don't have to. And getting that message out does seem fairly key because in terms of symptoms, they're fairly simple to spot. And in terms of treatment, if caught early, it can be really, really easily treated. And you sort of feel that seems to be a message worth getting out.
And there's surprisingly little conversation about this. And of course, there's the whole Movember movement, but I think most of that is actually about growing moustaches rather than talking about issues. Nice one.
I mean, Tom Selleck, gone but not forgotten. He's not dead, is he, Tom Selleck? Don't know. I hope not, because he's lovely. But no, I think men's health in general is it's funny, isn't it? Because I feel like, when we talk about men's health and when we talk about the loneliness epidemic and we talk about all these things, it's a kind of reframing of awareness that we have because of women. And yet it's also in a world that is structured for men. Do you know what I mean? That I always, I always feel that thing where I think in terms of like the menstrual cycle, when, the idea that women have to pay for sanitary products is insane. The idea that no culture ever has gone, I'll tell you what, that shows that healthcare is designed by men for men, and it's a hideous crime that women have to pay for sanitary products. But also, if men went through the menstrual cycle, the corner of every street would have like a state-sponsored hotel hospital that you could just check into and immediately go in and have, your toes massaged and be given green M&Ms and an Xbox and a bottle of whiskey to get through your period if you're a man. And because it happens to women, we're only starting to vaguely see now health infrastructure in different countries and public health in general respond to the menstrual cycle. And I feel like I like the fact that we're talking about men's health, and I like the fact that we're spotlighting men's health on so many levels, and we're breaking through all of that really kind of crass, big boys don't cry, man up bollocks, where, we can now discuss, men's health, mental health, and physical health. And yet I also feel that, we're doing that possibly at the expense of, or certainly through the prism of having ignored women's health forever. Do you know what I mean? So I'm kind of conscious of that whenever I have that conversation, I think.
Absolutely. Well, that's been the commercial breaks. Let's get back to our conversation. I also wanted to talk a little bit more about summer schools.
Oh, brilliant. Go on.
Do you remember your first summer?
Yes, absolutely. And loved it. Absolutely loved it. My friend Matt Kelly rang me up and I was working as a gardener in a hotel in Yorkshire on the moors. And he rang me up and said, do you want to come and do teaching, teach English? And I'd been a language assistant in France for like 6 months and I was rubbish. And with him, and he was in a neighbouring town, and he rang up and said, do you want to come and do this summer school? It's really serious. You can't mess about. It's hard to imagine, but as an 18-year-old, I was, prone to messing about. And I was like, yeah, go on. And we went down and did this summer school. And within about half an hour of arriving, I was in drag with full makeup on, going to a disco with all these young people who were just having the best time of their lives. And all the staff were having the best time of their lives. And at the end of that summer school, all of the students and all of the staff wrote all of our addresses and photocopied them and kept each other's addresses, which is now illegal. And I then, 2 of the students were Greeks who I really got along with, and they were lovely, and me and my friends kind of adopted them because they hated their group and they, didn't want to be with their group. And I then moved to Greece a couple of years later and got in touch with them, and their families that totally adopted me, were really kind and really looked after me. And they later moved to the UK and my family totally adopted them, and they came to, our house for Christmas for years and all this stuff. And they're now godparents to my children and two of my best friends. And, that was my first summer school. And I just thought, this is ace. This is so much better than having a real job. And I watched all of my friends go and get real jobs that they hated. And they just had a horrible time and really were at very junior levels doing great junior things and hated it. Whereas I was in summer school where, 500 people in Writtle Agricultural College in Chelmsford were all depending on you. You know what I mean? And it was hilarious. And I did it with two of my best friends, Joe and Matt, and we had a great time and we just really loved it. We had a brilliant time every summer. It was absolute chaos and brilliant and just so much fun. It was unreal. And then I kind of did that professional thing of, running one school, then running a group of schools, and then doing various things for, for the company that we worked for, Embassy as it was. And I had brilliant bosses. Lisa James was my first boss, who was fantastic. Mary Doody, just amazing people. And I learned loads from them. And I kind of went up this management thing of into sales, management of the schools, and got to be sitting looking at spreadsheets, and being in meetings, looking at pie charts. And I was thinking, I'm not interested, and so I went back to running a summer school, which I love. I love running a summer school. I absolutely love it. And every year I think, should I still do this? And every year I come away with so many things to process and so many things that I've learned. I always think, God, yeah, I've got to carry on doing that. I love it. Is it the same for you?
It sort of is.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, it's a lot of fun. It's huge fun. But I think as much as I do enjoy them, it's really hard work, and the responsibility that just adds up through the weeks of summer school, and it does get to you and it does drain you. How do you feel about that?
I think I always joke with my friends that we all work in the same sector, but we always joke about our summer school anxiety dreams starting earlier every year. Do you know what I mean? And I get my first summer school anxiety dreams starting about March, and I do genuinely kind of think, and when I'm working in the school and I live in the school, you know what I mean? And I'm always very conscious that I'm surrounded by a lot of young people, not just the students, but also the staff who are in my care. And I don't know, once those doors have closed and people are in bed and people have gone to sleep, have they? And what's happening? And I don't know. And some of that, obviously, I don't want to know. It's nothing to do with me. And some of that I really do want to know, because I want to know if they're scared or if they're, last year I had a call on the emergency phone from a parent, and they'd just spoken to their child who was having intrusive thoughts and was wanting to hurt themselves, and they were really scared, and the parent was really scared. And it was great because I was able to then go and meet that child, and myself and a colleague were able to talk with them and make them feel better, and it's not, those sort of things are not a kind of one wash and everything's all right. But in that particular instance, being able to be there and being able to help was really important. And you feel like this is worthwhile, this is worth doing. And I feel like that's also true for staff. You see staff who come in who may not have done that before, anything like that. And some of them love it and really get it, and some of them really don't. And you think, fair enough, it's different people, eh? And I feel like the friendships that I've forged, and you're one of those, in the sort of, the summer school world, are very different from the friendships I have, not better or worse, but the friendships that I've made in normal life compared to the friendships I've made, in a stairwell at 3 a.m, having not slept since June, join quite a different calibre of friendship,
How do you see the future of summer schools? We had an episode, Lisa, who you mentioned, was on
yes,
it as well.
I listened to that actually.
How do you see the future?
I think it's really interesting. I mean, I can only agree with the things that Lisa and Will and everybody was saying. That I think, Helen was talking about, doing it really well and quality being important. And I think that's definitely true. But I also feel like, we're increasingly a species that is isolated, that we are kind of isolated behind our lens, but we are less willing to communicate. And, the language need simply isn't there anymore. Netflix means that everybody speaks English now. Do you know what I mean? TikTok means that everybody speaks English now. So that need is not there, but also the need to be able to speak any languages is evaporating rapidly with the ability to translate virtually any language into virtually any language virtually 100% well, for free. Why would anybody bother learning a language? Do you know what I mean? And you and I love languages and are really conscious of the joy of languages, but somebody who's 10 years old now probably isn't. And, somebody who's 15, 16 doesn't see maybe the value of travel, doesn't see the value of meeting people, doesn't see the value of those kind of interactions that we hold dear. And I don't know that they're wrong. Like, I feel that they're wrong because I love those things, but why am I right? Maybe living in that kind of bubble where you are isolated and kind of insulated from opposing ideas, because I feel like summer school for me now, whatever the students come to us to study, what they're actually studying is themselves. And what they're actually learning is how to live with a group of people who they don't agree with. Do you know what I mean? And that's amazing, because actually not everybody can do that. And increasingly it's very hard for people to do that, staff and students, and we often have those very difficult conversations where staff, for example, will say, but this student holds views that are abhorrent and they've said these really, really awful things, so they have to be expelled because they hold different views. And you're like, I always feel it's like, is it malicious? Yes, then we take action. Is it ignorant? If they don't know what they've said or don't know why what they've said is upsetting for people, then that's education, and that's our job. Do you know what I mean? So if somebody says things that are based on not understanding why they hurt or why they're painful words to hear, then we have to help them with that. Whereas if they are actively attempting to be malicious, then that is a discipline concern. Do you know what I mean?
It's quite interesting, that knee-jerk reaction in education when you feel that somebody is so extremely rude that they need to be expelled. Not educating them.
Yeah, and you get that thing, don't you, when you've got like a 16-year-old, and they'll be, they'll hold views that we're genuinely horrified by, and people will go, this person's homophobic, for example, and you're like, well, of course they are, because they've grown up in Andalusia, they've gone to a very, very kind of Opus Dei school, and they're part of this structure which tells them that's the way they should think. So they think that, whether in fact they think that, we don't know yet, because they're a kid, eh? And they're always a kid. Do you know what I mean? Whatever they say, whatever they've done, they're always a kid, and they're always in our care. And I feel it's really interesting that we get this kind of knee-jerk reaction of just blocking them, and like, we've got to expel this person because they don't think the things that we do. And you're like, well, and there is a place for that, and there is a place for sanction, but there is also a place for helping that person understand why, in this context, that's not okay to say that. And I always feel those are the better conversations. And I still get messages now from students who I worked with 20 years ago or more saying, I remember when I said that terrible thing to this other kid who then became a great friend and just, was here for the christening of my children. And we would not have been friends unless you and your friends in that summer school had helped us work through that. And you think that's a good thing. That's a result.
Yeah.
Right.
We're coming to the end of this discussion.
Which I'm sure for you gentle viewers at home must be, grateful.
We started by talking about Christmas. I want to finish talking about New Year's resolutions. I don't do them. I bet you don't do them either.
I don't do them either.
But if you could recommend something for people, humanity, to do differently from tomorrow or next year, what would that be?
I think get out there and talk to people, and talk to people that you don't agree with. Do you know what I mean? And I feel like that ability to have difficult conversations is key. And I feel like that we're increasingly kind of polarized. And part of that, I think, is a really good, really welcome acceptance of the idea that we will no longer tolerate things that we previously thought were all right, and I think that's good, and I think that's healthy, and I think that's a really positive force in the world. But you also see the kind of huge rise of fascism, and that's because you've got the internet with every answer to every question, and that's a lot of information. So people just want to cut through that and get an easy answer. you know, and the world is changing rapidly. And so the easy answer is quite attractive, because if somebody just says, look, all of your problems are these people's fault or these people's fault, it's easy, that, isn't it? It's lovely and it's very seductive. And I feel like in education now, that's the battle, isn't it? That's the battle of saying to people, actually, you know, we've got to fight fascism. We've got to stand against the horror that could engulf us all, you know? And we've also got to stand against bloody Black Friday and going out and buying stuff. Do you know what I mean? And we've got to stand against destroying the world we sit on. You know what I mean? But we've also got to get along. You know? I'm not saying it's easy.
Right. And finally, is there anything that you should be doing more of or less of?
Well, clearly on today's product, listening is something I should work on. You asked me to talk. I don't know. No, I feel like
You did the right thing.
and, I'm trapped in a cage of timidity. It's very hard for me, but I've made an effort today. No, I feel like I always have to keep on learning, and I always have to be open to new things, because I think the thing that summer school teaches me relentlessly, and it's a hard lesson every year, but it is that I don't know everything and I don't know anything in some contexts. So as long as I'm still willing to learn and I'm still open, then I feel like that's a positive. Do you know what I mean? You can't teach if you can't learn, can you?
Absolutely.
Oh, I'll write that down.
It's going to be the title of the episode. Thank you so much, Thom, for being here. It's been an absolute
Great, thanks so
pleasure,
much for asking me. It's really kind of you.
as ever.
Yeah. You'll probably have to edit that into some semblance of you know, sense, but
It's going to be a 10-second spot, basically. Yeah.
best, isn't it? Best. I think 30 seconds probably from the entire thing is ample. I'm best in short doses.
And if you've listened this far, which is easy because it's only been 10 seconds as we discussed, please subscribe to the podcast on the platform that you're listening to.
I have. It's very good.
Thank you, Thom. And thank you, everyone. See you later.
Cheers.
Bye.
Cheers. Thanks so much. Bye now.